This is the last number. After this one, the ladder ends, not because the climb gets easier, but because there is nowhere left to climb. 100,000 changed how the world treated you. 1,000,000 made work optional. 10 million was the top of the personal ladder where the money outgrew your life. 100 million was the first rung off that ladder entirely, where wealth quietly turned into power. And now you are standing on the final rung of all, $1 billion. At 100 million, you became a small institution wearing a human face. At 1 billion, even that is gone, because $1 billion is no longer power held by a person. It has turned into something stranger and larger than any of the numbers before it. It has turned into a system, a piece of permanent infrastructure that the rest of the world quietly plugs into, whether it knows your name or not. At 100 million, you could bend a corner of the world. At 1 billion, you become one of the structures the world is built on. You are not rich anymore. You are not even powerful in the way a person is powerful. You have become a force the size of a small country, and the only question left on the entire ladder is the heaviest one of all. What does the world look like when one person holds this much? And what does holding it do to the person? Here is exactly what changes the day you reach $1 billion. Here is what you will understand by the end of this video, the final chapter of the entire series. 6 things become true at $1 billion that no smaller number, not even 100 million, could give you. The first is that you stop being rich and become infrastructure. The money is no longer something you own. It is something the economy itself runs on. The second is that you can no longer beat the market, because at this size, you have become part of it. Your capital is so large it moves the very prices it is trying to catch, and the money turns strangely, permanently illiquid. The third is that your time horizon stops being a lifetime and becomes effectively forever. $1 billion is built to outlive you by centuries, and you start thinking like an institution that never dies. The fourth is that your power stops competing with other rich people and starts operating at the scale of governments. You move money in amounts that used to belong only to nations. The fifth is the strangest reversal on the whole ladder. The person disappears. The more money there is, the less visible the human being becomes, until you are a name on a building and an abstraction in other people's plans. And the sixth is the summit the entire climb has been pointing at since the first $100,000. Your legacy stops being a monument you leave behind and becomes a system that keeps running without you. You do not just make history. You become a permanent part of its structure. Below 1 billion, you used money, and then money used the world. At 1 billion, you and the money and the world have quietly become the same machine. Let me show you. There is one idea that explains why $1 billion is not just a bigger version of 100 million, and for the last time on this ladder, watch what happens to the rule that carried us the whole way up. We have leaned on the 4% rule at every single step. Let me run it one final time, and then watch it stop meaning anything at all. The 4% rule says you can safely draw about 4% of a portfolio each year, forever, and never run out. Walk it to the very top. At 10 million, 4% was 400,000 a year, a solved, luxurious life. At 100 million, it was 4 million a year, already more than a person could spend. Now run it at 1 billion. $1 billion at 4% is $40 million a year. And if you simply let it sit and compound at its long-run average of around 7%, it throws off $70 million a year. Every year, touching nothing, while you sleep. $70 million a year. Stop and feel how absurd that sentence is. We proved back at 10 million that a single human being cannot spend even 400,000 a year on themselves without working at it. So $40 to $70 million of annual income is not money for a life anymore. It is not even money for a luxurious life or a powerful one. It is a budget the size of a small institution's entire operating year, arriving every 12 months, forever, attached to one name. And that is the exact moment the 4% rule finally dies as a personal idea. It is no longer telling you how to fund a life or even how to wield power. It is telling you the size of the permanent economic engine you now sit on top of, a river of money so large that no person, no family, and no single lifetime could ever absorb it. The money has stopped being yours to spend. It has become a thing that simply produces, the way a river simply flows. That is the whole shift in one sentence. At 10 million, the money exceeded the person. At 100 million, it exceeded the person so completely it became power. At 1 billion, it exceeds the person, the family, and the lifetime all at once, so completely that it stops behaving like wealth or even like power and starts behaving like infrastructure. It is a permanent structure that produces capital on its own, at a scale that touches markets, funds institutions, and shapes economies, and it will keep doing that long after you are gone. The number is 10 times 100 million, but what it becomes is not 10 times more power. It is a different category of thing entirely. Below this line, you held power. At 1 billion, you have become a permanent part of the machine, and the rest of this video is about what that machine does, and what it does to the one human being still attached to it. Unlock number 1. At $1 billion, you stop being rich and become infrastructure. The money is no longer something you own. It is something the economy runs on. For your entire climb, money was a possession. You had it. It was yours. Sitting in accounts, in funds, in buildings, doing what you told it to. Even at 100 million, when it became power, it was still fundamentally yours. Your institution, your influence, your leverage. At 1 billion, that frame quietly inverts. Because money this large stops sitting still and starts being woven into everything around it. Your capital is not in a vault. It is invested across companies that employ thousands of people, lent into projects that build real things, parked in funds that move whole markets, holding up the value of assets that millions of other people also depend on. Your money is load-bearing now. Pull it out suddenly and things would fall. Think about what that actually means. At 100 million, you could be the lead investor that decided whether one company lived or died. At 1 billion, you are simultaneously holding up dozens of them. You are part of the foundation under entire industries, sometimes under the financial health of whole towns. People who have never heard your name wake up and go to work at companies your capital keeps alive. Their pensions hold pieces of the same assets you hold. The economy is quietly leaning on your billion the way a building leans on a column it never thinks about. You have become a piece of the structure. And this is the psychological line nobody warns you about. When money is a possession, you control it. When money is infrastructure, it controls you back, because now you have obligations you cannot simply walk away from. You cannot just sell everything and disappear, not only because of taxes, but because your selling everything would itself be an event. It would move markets, end companies, cost real people real jobs. The money has tied you to the system it is holding up. You did not just get richer than 100 million. You stopped being a person who has wealth and became a part of the machinery that everyone else's wealth runs through. That inversion, from owning money to being owned by your role in the economy, is unlock number 1, and every other unlock flows out of it. Unlock number 2, and it is the one that breaks the rules of investing you have followed the entire way up. At $1 billion, you can no longer beat the market because you have become part of it. And your money turns strangely, permanently illiquid. At every level below this, you were a price taker. You bought an index, a stock, a fund, at whatever price the market offered, and your buying was a drop in the ocean. It changed nothing. That is the entire assumption that makes ordinary investing work. You are small enough that the market does not notice you. At $1 billion, that assumption quietly shatters, because now you are big enough that the market notices you. If you try to buy a large position, your own buying pushes the price up against you. If you try to sell, your own selling drives the price down. You are no longer a drop in the ocean. You are large enough to make waves, and the waves push back on you. So here is the strange trap of $1 billion that almost nobody outside this world understands. A huge amount of it is effectively illiquid, even when it is technically in stocks or a company. On paper, you are worth $1 billion. In reality, you could not turn it all into cash without destroying a large part of its own value in the process, because the act of selling at that scale moves the price down as you go. Much of $1 billion fortune is locked inside the very thing that makes it large: a founder's stake in a company, a concentrated position, an empire of assets that cannot be sold quickly without collapsing. The number on the screen is real and unreal at the same time. You are a billionaire who often cannot simply spend $1 billion. And this is the part that flips the whole game. Below this line, your job was to get the market's return. At $1 billion, you are big enough that you start to affect the return. Your decisions move prices. Your capital shapes which companies thrive. Your money is part of what the market even is. You stop being a passenger on the market and become a piece of the weather. That sounds like ultimate power, and in some ways it is, but it comes with the quiet cage of illiquidity and consequence. Every large move you make is felt, watched, and pushed against. You cannot trade like a small investor ever again because you are no longer small, and you never will be again. That transformation, from beating the market to becoming the market, is unlock number 2. Unlock number 3, and it is the one that quietly changes how you think more than any other. At $1 billion, your time horizon stops being a lifetime and becomes effectively forever. For your whole climb, you planned in human time. A career, a few decades of compounding, a retirement to fund, a life to get through, maybe your children and grandchildren at the far edge of the plan. Even at $100 million, the legacy question was about the generations right after you. At $1 billion, the time scale stretches past anything personal, because a fortune this large is mathematically built to outlive you by centuries. Remember the rule of 72. Money compounding at 7% doubles about every decade. $1 billion left mostly untouched does not shrink across a lifetime. It grows. It becomes $2 billion, then 4, then 8, across the generations after you, faster than any sane family could ever spend it down. The money is not a thing you will use up. It is a thing that will still be here, larger, long after everyone who knew you is gone. So you start to think like the only entities that plan in that kind of time: institutions. Churches, universities, and the oldest foundations think in hundreds of years, and at $1 billion you are forced to join them because your money is going to be here in 100 years, whether you plan for it or not. The only question is, in what form? This is why the structures of the truly large fortunes, the perpetual trusts, the endowments, the foundations built to run forever, are not vanity. They are simply what you build when you finally accept that the money has a lifespan measured in centuries, and yours is measured in decades. You begin making decisions for a version of the world you will never see on behalf of an entity that does not die. And here is the subtle, vertiginous part of this unlock. Once your time horizon becomes permanent, you stop being the owner of the money and start being merely its current steward, the person holding the relay baton for one short leg of a race that started before you understood it and will continue long after you let go. The money becomes older than you, in a sense, and more permanent than you, and you become the temporary human attached to a thing that is effectively immortal. You did not just get a bigger fortune. You inherited a forever, and a forever changes what every decision means. That shift, from a lifetime to permanence, is unlock number 3. Unlock number 4, and it is the one that finally takes the power off the personal scale entirely. At $1 billion, your power stops competing with other rich people and starts operating at the scale of governments. At $100 million, we said you gained influence, a hand on the steering wheel of institutions. At $1 billion, the comparison is no longer to other wealthy individuals. It is to states. Think about the numbers honestly. $1 billion is larger than the entire annual budget of many city governments, and on par with the budgets of some smaller national agencies and institutions. When your philanthropy moves, it can fund efforts the size of what a government department would run, eradicating a disease in a region, rebuilding after a disaster, funding research at a scale that shifts an entire field. You are no longer donating to causes. You are operating programs the size of public policy, except you answer to no voters and no election. And that is the genuinely new thing here. The thing that makes $1 billion different in kind from everything below it. You can often move faster than a government, with no committee, no budget cycle, no public vote. One person deciding to deploy hundreds of millions can outpace entire ministries. You can fund or fight things at the level of nations, shape industries, back technologies that change how billions of people live, move capital across borders in ways that affect whole economies. The largest private fortunes on Earth now sit at a table that used to belong only to governments, and they got there without ever being elected to anything. That is power of a completely different type, and we have to be honest about its weight, because this channel is about honesty. This is the level where concentrated wealth stops being a personal matter and becomes a question about how the world should even work. One private individual, accountable to no one, holding the power of a small state. That is a genuinely uneasy thing, and it should sit a little uneasily even with the person holding it. Used well, $1 billion can do things governments are too slow or too divided to do. Cure, build, lift, fund the future. Used carelessly or selfishly, it concentrates the steering of the shared world in hands that nobody chose. At $1 billion, you are not just steering your corner of the world anymore. You have a hand on levers that move whole populations, and almost no one is checking what you do with them. That is the double edge of the fourth unlock, and it is sharper here than anywhere else on the ladder. Unlock number 5, and it is the strangest reversal on the entire climb. At $1 billion, the person disappears. The more money there is, the less visible the human being becomes, until you are a name on a building and an abstraction in everyone else's plans. Climb the ladder in your mind one more time. At 100,000, you were fully a person who happened to have some savings. All the way up, the human being stayed at the center. It was your life, your house, your freedom, your power. At $1 billion, something inverts that almost nobody anticipates. The human being is no longer the main thing. The fortune is. People stop relating to you and start relating to your capital. A meeting with you is a meeting with $1 billion that happens to have a face. Your name stops being a name and becomes a brand, a logo on a foundation, a line item in other people's strategies, an institution people apply to for grants. The person who started this climb gets quietly buried under the size of what they built. And the practical version of this is the most extreme privacy and security situation on the whole ladder. At 100 million, you became a target. At $1 billion, you can almost never again be an ordinary, anonymous human in public. Your security is permanent. Your real movements are hidden behind layers. The trusts and holding companies and foundations that hold your fortune are so abstract that even you relate to your money through a wall of entities and managers. You do not hold $1 billion. An institution with your name on it does, and you visit it. The richer you got, the more layers grew between you and the world, and between you and your own money, until the actual human being at the center is almost impossible to see, even for the people closest to you. So the final shift in the skill set is the saddest one. At the bottom of the ladder, the work was earning. In the middle, it was investing. At 10 million, it was defending the fortune. At 100 million, it was defending the person. At $1 billion, the work becomes something nobody warns you about, trying to remain a person at all when the entire world, and eventually you yourself, has started treating you as a fortune with a human attached. The money did not just put your safety and privacy at risk. It quietly dissolved your ordinary humanity, your ability to be just a person among people. And that turns out to be the most expensive thing the whole climb ever cost. That disappearance, from a person to an abstraction, is unlock number 5. Unlock number 6, and it is the true summit. The place this entire series has been climbing toward since the very first $100,000. At $1 billion, your legacy stops being a monument you leave behind and becomes a system that keeps running without you. You do not just make history. You become a permanent part of its structure. Step all the way back and look at the whole ladder one final time. 100,000 bought respect. 1 million bought freedom. 10 million solved your life and asked what you wanted your money to mean. 100 million made that legacy structural. It forced you to become a dynasty, a foundation, or an empire. At 1 billion, even that is no longer quite the frame, because the fortune is now so large and so permanent that it does not merely leave a mark on the world. It becomes one of the world's standing structures. A billion-dollar foundation does not fund a cause. It becomes a permanent institution in that cause, shaping it for a century. A billion-dollar company does not enter an industry. It becomes part of the landscape everyone else has to navigate. A billion-dollar dynasty does not pass down wealth. It founds a lineage that will sit among the powers of its world for generations. You are not carving a monument anymore. You are pouring a foundation that other people will build their lives on top of. And it tends to harden into the same 3 forms as 100 million, only now at permanent structural scale. The dynasty becomes a multi-generational house of capital, powerful enough to shape its descendants' world for a century, with all the danger that brings to the descendants themselves. The foundation becomes a perpetual institution at the scale of a public good, the path of the very largest fortunes in history, where the money outlives the person by 100 years and quietly shapes a disease, a field, a country. And the empire becomes a company or institution so embedded in the world that it keeps running, keeps employing, keeps shaping, long after its founder is a name in a history book. In all 3, the defining feature is the same. It runs without you. The system you build no longer needs the person who built it. Notice what that finally means, because it is the whole point of the summit. At $1 billion, you achieve a strange kind of immortality and pay for it with yourself. The thing you build outlives you, keeps acting in the world, keeps your name standing for centuries. But it does so as a system, not as a person, and the actual human being is long gone from the inside of it. You become history not as a story people tell, but as a structure people stand on without thinking about. The ones who reach this summit and understand it know they are no longer deciding how to live or even what to leave. They are deciding what permanent machine they want to switch on and walk away from, knowing it will run for 100 years, carrying their name and none of their breath. That choice, to consciously design the system you become, is unlock number 6, and it is the real peak of the entire climb. So here you are at the top of the whole ladder, looking at $1 billion, asking the 2 final honest questions. How does anyone actually get here? And what does it truly do to the rare few who do? Let us answer both without flinching, because this is the last and most misunderstood number of them all. Start with the brutal truth about how. Everywhere below 100 million, some version of the boring formula could still work. Index funds, time, discipline, and for the leap to 100 million, owning a business that scaled. But $1 billion is another 10 times leap beyond that. And here even ownership of a normal successful business is usually not enough. By the rule of 72, money at 7% doubles about every decade. So even 100 million compounding untouched is only around 200 million in 10 years, 400 in 20. Passive compounding will essentially never carry a single person from 100 million to 1 billion in a lifetime. So let me be completely straight with you, the way this channel always has been. Almost nobody reaches $1 billion by investing well or even by owning a good business. They reach it almost exclusively one way, by founding or holding a huge concentrated stake in something that becomes enormous. A company that grows to be worth tens of billions, of which you own a large slice. It is founder equity in a rocket, caught at the rarest possible scale. And it requires not just skill and work, but timing, luck, and circumstance stacking up in a way that no one can plan or repeat. The index builds wealth. Ownership builds fortunes. But a billion is built by owning a meaningful piece of something the whole world ends up using. And that is as much fortune as it is effort. And here is the most important half of that truth, the half this entire series exists to tell you. Almost no one reaches a billion, and almost no one should organize their life around trying. The freedom you actually wanted was won, in full, all the way back at 1 to 10 million. The solved life, the comfort, the time, the security, the ability to do what you love with people you love. Every real prize the money can buy was already on the table before you left the personal ladder. A billion does not add more life to that. It cannot, because there is no more life to add. It adds power, permanence, and scale. And it subtracts, as we have seen, your privacy, your liquidity, your anonymity, and eventually, your ordinary humanity. For all but a vanishingly rare few with a genuine mission that needs this scale, $1 billion is not a bigger prize than 10 million. It is a heavier one. Now the final trap, and it is the darkest on the entire ladder, the one the whole climb has been quietly warning you about. Lower down, the traps cost you money. At 100 million, the trap cost you yourself. At $1 billion, the trap is that there is no longer a self left to lose. The person has been fully replaced by the fortune. This is the level where the money can completely eat the human being holding it, where you become the institution, where every relationship runs through your capital, where you have not had an honest, unguarded interaction in years, where the scoreboard is the only thing left that feels real. And the warm, ordinary life the whole climb was supposed to be for has quietly become impossible. The cruelest fact on the entire ladder is this: the number that gives one person the most power over the outside world is the same number most likely to hollow out their inside one completely. So here are 3 rules to survive $1 billion, not just reach it, though survive is the truer word here than at any other rung. Rule 1. Understand that almost no one should want this number, and that wanting it is usually a sign you have mistaken the scoreboard for the prize, because the prize, the actual freedom, was won milestones ago. Rule 2. If you do reach it, through mission or through fortune, treat the money as something you steward, not something you are. Build the structures, yes, but fight every single day to stay a human being inside them, to keep the few people who knew you before the zeros, to stay reachable by your own life. And Rule 3, the last and most important sentence in this entire series, the whole point of the climb from the very first $100,000 was to make money serve your life. And the higher you go, the harder the money fights to reverse that, until at $1 billion, keeping money in its place as a servant rather than a master becomes the single hardest and most important thing you will ever do with it. $1 billion is not the richest version of a life. It is the moment a life is almost entirely replaced by a system. The wealth was won long, long ago, somewhere far down this ladder. What you hold at the top is no longer wealth or even power. It is permanence and a kind of immortality bought at the price of the very ordinary human life the whole climb began in service of. The only thing that has ever really mattered, at every rung from the first to this last one, is whether the person stays in charge of the money, or the money quietly takes charge of the person. And so we reach the top of the ladder and the end of the whole journey. Look back down it one last time, all the way to the bottom. 100,000 bought respect, 1 million bought freedom, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million solved your life and set you free. And that the whole series has tried to tell you, was always the real summit. The rung where the money finished its one honest job of buying back your time. 100 million turned wealth into power. And 1 billion, this final number, turns power into permanence. Where you stop being rich and become infrastructure. Where you stop beating the market and become it. Where your time horizon becomes forever. Where your power rivals governments. Where the person disappears. And where your legacy stops being a monument and becomes a system that runs for a century without you. The first 100,000 was the goal. The first 1 million was the dream. But somewhere in the middle of this ladder, the money quietly finished giving you everything that was ever actually good for you. And everything above that line has been about power, permanence, and what those things cost. That is the real map of the whole climb. And it is the most honest thing this channel knows how to say. If this series changed how you see the numbers you are working toward, if it moved your real target back down to the rung that buys a free, full human life, then it did the only job it was ever for. Drop a comment with where you are on the journey and where you now think you actually want to stop. We built this community one honest number at a time, and this is the last one. And as always, the line worth repeating to the very end. This channel is for education, not financial advice. I am not your advisor. Learn it, question it, run your own numbers, and build the life that is right for you. And remember that the best number on this entire ladder was never the biggest one. It was the one that finally set you free. Thank you for climbing the whole thing with me. Take care of yourself out there.